Hello and welcome to Unity in Diversity. I am Anita Menon. I work as the Multicultural Community Engagement Coordinator and Transition Support Worker at Vita Domestic Violence Prevention Services in Brantford, Ontario. And my pronouns are she and her.
And I am Zila Ozels, Manager of Programming and Partnerships at the Brantford Public Library, and my pronouns are she and her.
This is a series in collaboration between Nova Vita Domestic Violence Prevention Services and Brantford Public Library, and partially funded by the Women and Gender Equality Canada. We began Unity in Diversity in 2021 as a series of live Zoom events. Through the series, we have community members to share their diverse experiences and knowledge through stories and conversations. Our objective is to educate through our speakers' stories about the history of Canada and Brantford, the diverse cultures that shape our community, and the experiences, challenges, or barriers faced by groups and individuals in our community in order to work towards an inclusive community where everyone feels they belong.
When we share experiences and stories, we spark a connection. We learn about each other's traditions, practices, and historical truths, and we unlearn false and harmful narratives. Stories convey meaning and purpose that help us understand ourselves and our world. Through stories, we share passions, fears, sadness, hardships, and joys, and we find common ground with other people to connect and communicate.
In our first season, we spoke with Roberta Hill about her experiences as a child in a residential school. This season, we invited her again to have a conversation with us. In this recording, we talk about the impacts of being a residential school survivor and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and calls to action. We are honored to be able to share the conversation for others to learn.
Roberta Hill is a Mohawk from Six Nations of the Grand River Territory. She has 3 children and 6 grandchildren. In 1957 to 1961, she was orphaned and sent to the Mohawk Institute Indian Residential School along with 5 of her siblings. From 1961 to 1969, she was sent to 3 different foster homes in Durham County as part of the 60s Scoop.
Roberta was a registered nurse for 32 years and retired in 2012. Currently, she is the chairperson for the non-for-profit charitable organization, the Mohawk Village Memorial Park, a residential school survivor project to build a memorial park to honor all the children that were sent to the Mohawk Institute, commonly known as Mush Hole. Today, she is one of several survivors of the Mohawk Institute that have joined the Survivor Secretariat and will be working with many agencies in the search for any burial sites of children.
We want to thank Roberta for once again taking the time and energy to speak with us and share her experiences with us and viewers.
So thank you again, Roberta, for agreeing this again for the season 2. We had the pleasure of having you in season 1, and it was a wealth of information and knowledge that you shared. And from the, I know I had your bio and I had the information. Is there anything else you would like to add about yourself that wasn't shared in your bio?
Not in particular with my bio, because I think I've covered everything as where my life changed as a little girl. You know, when I became an orphan, that's a whole other direction in life, and this is where it has led me today.
And so in regards to how you kind of say like that direction that really changed and brought you to where you are now, what is it that typically like you share with others, or is there something you want to share with anyone who will be viewing this recording?
Well, I think one of the things that people should really understand is that your life changes, but it's not anything that a child has control of. So your life takes a whole other direction with no, you don't have any input because you're an orphan, right? So they can put you where they want to, where they think it's best, I guess. But it's not always to our benefit, because at that point you're separated from your family. It didn't start immediately with the separation, but once we got into the residential school, that's where the beginning of the separation was, is that my baby sister never went there, but I never got to see her again until years later. And the rest of them got split up into different foster homes, and the older one got put into the juvenile detention system, the girl, like my older sister. So yeah, it disrupted our lives immensely, and you can't change that as a kid. You have to go wherever they tell you you're going and wherever they decide they want to put you. That's it. That's your life. So you have to, as a child, kind of like, you have to accept these things. You may not like them, but you don't know how to make the changes that would have brought, like, I would love to have been able to come home, even if they would have at some point said, we know you have other brothers and sisters. How about if we get something arranged where you can meet your siblings? That would have been wonderful. It never happened. And the only reason I knew where they were was because the guy, the husband and the wife that had the children on, 3 of the kids on Six Nations, he found out where we were and he got the kids to write us a letter. So that was good. Wow. I knew that they were there and that they were okay. They talked about their farm life and the things they were doing as kids and what they were learning on the farm. And so those were really good things to hear. It really made that connection again, because other than that, if I didn't hear from them, I would have been wondering, where the heck are they? Because nobody told us until then. So I thought that was a really good thing, positive thing in our lives at that time.
Would you say that was one thing that happened, helped you connect back to your roots?
Yes, for sure. Because we always knew where we were. We just didn't know how to get back there.
Right. Yeah.
I always knew I had brothers and sisters. What I didn't have, when you look at the broader picture, though, I didn't know all of the other family members, the extended family. I knew certain people were in my life before we went to the Mush Hole, the Mohawk Institute, but I couldn't remember the names and how we were connected. So yeah, that's a whole other I don't know what you would call it, but once you're out of the system, then you have to come back and kind of find your way as to where do you belong. It's when you uproot children like this, it's really difficult, because now you're kind of like, I always say I'm set adrift. I don't know that I've got those roots yet, even though I know where I come from. It's when you disrupt children that way, and you separate them with no contact with families and stuff, you just don't have that permanent relationship with your family in those growing up years. All those things that you would have done with your siblings, the playing, the growing years, you don't have that. You'll never have it. You'll never get it back. So that's a hard adjustment to do, even though you know who they are. You've missed those years, and there isn't anything other than, there is one good side to it, because once you get together again, you can refresh all those memories about what they were doing, what we were doing, and so those are good things. I knew that I could see that they were okay when they started talking about things,
And one thing you mentioned is, when like you were uprooted from your childhood, when it was very small, and children, and it's basically molding them the way whoever has taken you. Sounded like almost like the dough that is not yet cooked, putting it into different shapes, and whoever has taken that dough is just basically putting into the shape that they wish, and that's basically just removing from the actual, the roots that should have been shaped. You were supposed to be shaped in a particular way, but it was basically completely
Well, that is true, because when I look at residential school, and I've done extensive research just on my own, and I look at the residential school system and what their intent was, we didn't know those things as children. You know, you never know what agenda they have, but now when you look at it, yeah, that was totally an assimilationist policy, you know, and what we're seeing now is that, yeah, it was very much cultural genocide. They wanted the identity gone. They wanted us to be just like them. And that would mean stripping the languages away, stripping any cultural practices and ceremonies away. You weren't allowed to have those things. And, you know, in residential school, you would have been punished for those things. And by the time you get to foster care, you're supposed to be the Anglican kid that they want you to be, you know? And so they place you in an Anglican home. And those are the things that you're supposed to follow. You're supposed to follow what they believe in, with no thought for what, well, maybe somebody, and I know there's a lot of Anglicans in my family, but I also know a lot of my relatives were in residential school. When I look back on it, there was quite the connection there. And so, yeah, there was a whole operation to to change the identity, you know, and I think that's wrong. That should never happen, because it just causes a lot of problems, you know, it really
Yeah.
does. And then it got much broader. It wasn't just us at Six Nations. It expanded out to other First Nations. Then it went into the North. You know, so it was a huge, huge undertaking for the government and the churches to do this, but they were doing it because it was working, you know. That's the sad part.
Mhm.
They should just let people be who they are. If you let people be who they are from birth, I think, and you have that family connection, without all the violence, without all the things that we were experiencing, there should be healthier communities, I would say, if they'd have left them alone, you know, left any of us alone. And I know that in our circumstances as orphans, that doesn't give anybody the right to abuse or to try to change anybody. If you know where we came from, why could you not incorporate those values, those things into the lessons and the things that were being taught at the institute? But that's not what they wanted, so it would never have happened.
So wiping out the identity itself, and basically just rather than respecting what I was hearing is, it would have been so much a positive community if everybody respected each other's identity,
Yeah.
and who they are, and respected and lived together by sharing each other's identity and their life. That would have been such a like a positive community and stronger community, would you say?
Oh, I think so, absolutely. Now, it's because it was always a community of the clan system where families stayed together. They, you know, you respected all of those boundaries and stuff like that, you know, but it just wasn't the way it was. It wasn't what they wanted, you know. And I think of in the research, like I said, I was doing, I see the things is that they were going to continue until there was not one Indian left in the body politic. And then there would be no need for an Indian Affairs Department. And I think as back in under the 1969 white paper, there was discussion. And I saw a quote from Pierre Elliott Trudeau, Justin Trudeau's father. And he was even saying that if you don't speak your language, if you're Indian and you don't speak your native language, then you're not an Indian. You don't have any rights. If you don't speak your language, you don't practice your cultural traditions and your ceremonies, then you don't have any right to call yourself an Indian, and you have no right to claim Aboriginal rights. But you look on the other side of this, who's the one that's preventing the language? And not only that, I think the one thing that is you targeted children. You targeted Indigenous children to destroy identities of our nations. That's what was done. You know, so don't blame us because we don't have it. And now today it's a fight to get funding to build the Gawanio School, which is a Mohawk language immersion program. You shouldn't have to fight for this. This was an intentional attack on the language and the culture to destroy identities. So, you know, there's a lot more to this, is that, oh, you know, you just didn't want to learn your language, or it's your fault you don't have it. No, you attacked the children. Basically, that was the target group, and they knew they could change it because they had said, we can't change the adults who have their language and practice their cultural traditions. But we know we can change the younger ones, get them while they're young. so it works. It does work that way. And, it's unfortunate because it's not even just our community. It's many communities. It's not just Canada. It was the US did the same thing. Internationally, there's other Native cultures that experience the same thing. So this was a kind of like a worldwide thing. It's that colonialism, I think,
Yeah.
Yeah.
As you say, like the research and when you actually like learn about what's happened and the intent to erase, I think it's really hard to like consider that there was any positive intent behind anything they were doing. But what would you say to people who are like, well, they just had the best interest in mind for the children in doing this? That's something I hear a lot sometimes before people really learn what was behind everything. But what do you say to people who still kind of have that mindset?
What I would say is, whose best interest was it? It wasn't our best interest. It was the government and the church's best interest. Let's get that one straight. Because if it really was for our best interest, how did we end up to be in residential schools, and the trauma and the impacts from that? And today we're looking for missing children, unmarked burials. Children died in these schools. Some schools knew there was going to be deaths. They actually had cemeteries there. So nobody can ever say, and I've heard the government they've written this, we only wanted to, we're trying to do our best. We were going to educate. No, that's just a smokescreen. That's propaganda as far as I'm concerned, because we would not have experienced what we experienced if you were thinking about our best interest, and if you look at some of the earlier documents, it was that Indigenous people, especially around this area where I am, is that they only ever wanted to educate to a certain level. And they've written this, that we'll educate them. And what was that? I'm trying to think of that quote, where is that they're only going to be, you can educate the savage, but at the end of it, you'll just have an educated savage. Nothing was going to change. That's the mindset for them. And it's like, oh, they really thought that. But then I seen another article where it says, we were going to be their servants. The women, that's why I think residential school was all domestic, right? It was pretty much teaching the girls the domestics. It was teaching the young boys farming and trades and stuff like that, where they could fix things and mostly do the hard labor. And so that's really what the agenda was. We were going to be servants, and it said they can be servants for us. So there was no good intent. And it's like, the superior attitudes that we're better than you'll never ever rise to our level. And yet when I think of our communities in the history of the Six Nations, we were way above that to begin with. It's just blind trust. You trust people that they'll be honest, and they're not. And you think of Six Nations even as allies of the Crown of England, and now look at where's that relationship? And what happened since then, and then you attack the children. So I don't have too many good things to say about this whole situation, because I know that the intent was not good.
I know with all the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and calls to action, and just recently we just had our Truth and Reconciliation Day as well. So what does it mean to you, and what would you like to share with the viewers or the listeners of this conversation, and understand about, and what would be the recommendation that you would suggest?
As far as Truth and Reconciliation, because I know that we've always asked for the truth, and that is the bigger part of the Truth and Reconciliation, because you can't reconcile unless you have the truth. And some people will tell you, I don't even know what that means. How do I reconcile with the past? How do I move forward after all that's been done? The damage, the hurt, the children who died because of this. And yet survivors will stand up, as painful as it is. They are telling their truths. Here's what happened. And yet I see from the church, they say, we're sorry we did what we did. But have they made any changes? You see, that's the thing. There was so much abuse from in a lot of the residential school institutions, and a lot of it, I would say, the majority of the administration was a church official, and they knew what was going on. Some of them were part of it. You know, the abuses, the sexual abuse, the physical. It's all of it, mental, cultural, everything. So, what are they doing today that would make me believe that they're going to change? People don't like to hear this word, but there was a lot of pedophilia within these institutions. And people, I know the religious people, they don't want us to, I think, make that public, but that was our reality as children.
Yep.
So you can't undo what happened. What they can do is say, how are you going to fix this? What are you doing within your church that's going to make sure that this never happens again? You know, and yet I don't see anything. The only answer I ever got was, well, we're working on it. Okay, this isn't new. I don't believe this problem is new with residential schools. They didn't just decide one day that you're going to be a pedophile. There's something within the history of this church that says it seemed to be acceptable. And maybe I'm wrong in what I'm hearing, but they seem to run on two different, separate from your average person. What happens in the church when you commit these, to me, they're crimes against children, right? For crime.
Yep.
But yet, your average citizen who committed a crime against a child, especially assaulting and beating children, sexually assaulting children, you would be in a court system and you would be going to jail. So why is it allowed to happen in the church with nothing or very little, other than, my understanding is, if you consider child abuse like that not a crime but a sin, sins are forgivable. And that is wrong to me, because nobody else sitting in jail because of these crimes can say, well, I only committed a sin, I didn't commit a crime, you should let me out of jail. So that's one issue. I think that there should be not two laws, or maybe two interpretations of the law where it allows you to get away with this stuff, you know, or hide under the name of the church. No, you shouldn't be allowed to, because that's why it will continue, because there is no punishment, you know, or
So like a double standard.
Very much so, because it's not even just here. Like I said, this is across the country. It happens all over in these residential schools. And not only residential schools, when you look at some of the establishments around that didn't have residential schools, look at the Catholic Church. They're still going through, and they didn't have residential schools, but yet it was very prevalent within the churches, this abuse. So yeah, they have something to deal with. And so how do you reconcile with this when they haven't made the changes? It's hard for them to get to even acknowledge. I've never heard them say, well, geez, we committed a crime. I've never heard that. Start focusing on what it really is, not just say it's a sin. That's like saying, well, so what if I sexually assaulted you? It was my sin. No. Do you know what you've made this child go through? How this child feels being abused that way? It forever destroys your life. You don't get over it. You manage to go through life. Some people don't get over it, but it will be forever something that the child has to live with and grow up with. And so they get off the hook because they said, you know what, will you forgive me? You know, it's a sin. No, I don't agree with that. And I think that in all fairness, justice is justice, and it has to be for all.
And interesting, when you said is, you know, the truth is important, and I can relate to that, like how it is, if we are truly wanting to make a change, we need to be open to hearing the bitter truth.
That's right. And that's hard for people to take, you know, because it's the church, their faith. A lot of the congregation, like with churches, I don't blame them, because it's been hidden from them too. Not always, but it has been hidden. There's people that are very faithful to the church, and that is what makes them, you know, helps them walk through life. And that's fine. I don't have anything against that. it's the higher ups. Like I said, it's people who are in those positions of power and authority kind of thing over your congregation. You should have no right to stand there and preach to anybody if you haven't dealt with your own issues. You know, you just should not. It's not like it's even minor. These are serious charges against church officials. You have no right to preach to anybody.
Absolutely.
That's my opinion.
Yes, absolutely. And would you say, like, for the unlearning and the relearning to happen, you need to first learn the past history?
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah.
Yeah, and the past history needs to come from, like the authentic fact rather than the polished.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, you can gloss it over all you want, like people do. And especially in the church where, it's like they kind of just want to go way up here and say, well, we said we're sorry. We've made an apology, but you haven't dealt with what's under that. Admit it. Admit that there is some sickness in your church that needs to be cleaned up. Something is really wrong in there when you can allow this and you try to escape, from the truth of it and from any kind of punishment that anyone else will have to go through. They've always managed. It's not always. Sometimes there is one guy they'll put out there that has to face the music, but I think, like I was saying, it has to be justice equally across the board, and that's it. Don't hide.
I mean, yeah, like this is a major abuse of power, like people in positions of power are using that. And even what you were saying, Anita, about the polished history, it's like,
yes,
but the history was put in place. The history that we learned in school was put in place by the people in power. And so there's just, this justice isn't equal because people in power are fully abusing their powers.
Yep. But one of the other things I heard was that this is fairly recently too, and I disagree with that one too, is that you really shouldn't go after them as pedophiles because it's a mental illness. Well, I know lots of people with mental illnesses that end up in jail because you also know right from wrong. So don't hide behind that either. And that really was like a sticking point with me. I know lots of people with mental illness, and there's no way I'd let them get away with this just because you can hide and say, well, it's a mental illness with me. Sure, it's mental for sure. But these guys know right from wrong. And you can't, to me, you should never hide behind this.
Yeah.
Something like you look at a serial killer. This one look at a serial killer.
Yes.
Do they get to escape once they're caught and say, well, I'm mentally ill, I'm a serial killer, I got something wrong with my brain? No, some of them actually go to jail and actually are executed because of their crimes. So no, you can't, to me, don't hide behind that. And the only way you'll ever get to hide behind that is if you were in an acute psychosis and you couldn't stop what you're doing. But other than that, most people know right from wrong, and it's wrong to do this. So don't hide there.
And that ignores the fact that many people with mental illnesses are the ones that tend to be abused by people in power. And additionally, it ignores the fact that as a society, we have this imbalance between older white men doing things to younger people, period.
There's a lot to this. It's one of those things that I think people should have discussions more about, is that this right and this wrong and how the church gets away with these things. And I'm not trying to point fingers at one in particular, but there's a broader picture here where there seems to have been a very big cover up over probably generations, centuries, even for all I can see. So it's an unhealthy place to be. And I don't send my children. I won't send them to church. I don't believe I have to go into church even. You can pray anywhere. You can ask for forgiveness anywhere. You can do all kinds of things. It's the Creator will listen. You do not have to have that church. I just teach it's just that fear within me is that I would never put them in that spot. Never.
Absolutely. And as you said, it's if the same crime was committed by other people, it would be a crime.
Absolutely.
It wouldn't be a mental health. and using mental health as a shield itself is, I think, diminishing and like devaluing, I feel.
Well, yeah, I think you're right there. And I think one of the things that they may try to get away with is that there is a mental component to this, because when you think of the brain and how the brain works, it's that pleasure center, right?
Yeah.
So that's there. But you also know right from wrong. And maybe this has been part of their culture right from like their early years. It doesn't make it right, because we're all taught the values in life and what's right and what's wrong and what's acceptable in society, right? So they should know that, to me, and you don't hide behind those things. But like I said, it is a mental thing, because this is something they like.
Yes.
That doesn't give them the right to do it. There's a lot of things that people, like, I go back to the serial killer. He loves to kill.
Yeah.
It's mental.
Yeah.
Does that give, So yeah, there's a lot to that.
The sadistic pleasure.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like people need to hear exactly like what happened and how it impacted people, and acknowledge it before even talking about moving forward.
And continues to impact like today, like
yes,
still.
Yeah, it does. And one of the sad parts about this with residential school is that when you victimize kids that come in there, some of the younger ones, like I said, they were 3 years old, or if not, I think there might have been a 2-year-old. But when they're really young, these are the things that they're being taught. And there's nothing that says this is wrong. It seemed to be acceptable. It seemed to be the norm that you could prey on children, you could sexually abuse them. And so what are they learning? They're learning that this is okay.
This is okay. Yeah.
So a certain percent of those children will become abusers too, because that's just the way it is. And it's unfortunate, because that was the institutional life, and it should never have been that way. We weren't taught good things. We were taught discipline and punishment and things like that. But, to actually be teaching us what is our role in society as children, as we grow, what is accepted of us, other than going to church, listen to that and pray to God and all that other stuff. What values were we being taught? And not everybody went that way. They understood that. But I say the younger you get them, the more apt you're going to turn their thinking into that's normal. Nothing happened to them guys that were abusing them, so it must be okay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What you're saying about never had the chance to learn about what your role in society should or would be is like really like sticking with me. And I don't know why exactly, but it is such a key, I think, part of growing up is like learning sometimes unsaid lessons and things like that. And yeah, your role in society, and kind of makes me think back to how you were saying about being separated and completely like disconnected from family and your community and your roots. And like, so in that sense, you're not going to learn a role that was even close to like maybe what the rest of your family was learning.
No, what I learned, I say from the age of 6 to 18, those are the years that I was in under somebody's care, right? Authoritarian care. But I think those are important years. Whereas what did I learn? I learned to be submissive. I learned to listen to authority, and you don't have opportunities to really question why they're doing what they're doing. You just have to accept the punishment and what's going on around you, and I don't think those are ideal conditions to raise any child. It's just not. There's nobody that can give me a good answer that this was a good place, because you miss those years of like I said, it's always growing up with your siblings. That would have been nice. Understanding, and as it branches out, here's your extended family. Here's what your social norms and what's accepted within your community. I knew the 12 years of being under somebody's thumb. I knew right from wrong, That's not what I'm saying. I did know that because I know that there was a lot of punishment if I did this or if I did that. So you learn, you'll learn that, but it's those other social interactions. How do you behave when you meet, say, with that stage of teenagers, when you're meeting boys? I didn't know. I was afraid. I didn't want anybody close to me because of that. I was like really trying to protect me because that's what I had to do. I'm the one that had to look after me in residential school and any place else because I didn't see anybody else coming to my rescue. So this little girl's going to do what this little girl does. And that means keep people away from me. That's not healthy either. When you're talking about those teenage years and dating and all that, I didn't like that because I was afraid of them. I was afraid of what people could do. The only thing I did was I started drinking. That's not good. Then those barriers come down, right? When you're drinking. And so that's not a good thing either. But it was one of those things that I didn't know how to function outside of this structured system of somebody always being in authority over me, telling me what to do. So those are things that I didn't learn, is like that acceptable social behavior until later on, And it's important in anyone's growing up years, how to behave and how to interact with the opposite sex, right? It really is. So yeah, those are tough times, but I learned. It took me a long time, but I learned.
Learning social skills and life skills.
Yeah, and after, like I said, when you're under the authority of, say, residential school and then foster care, and then you have to, at the age of 18, guess you can leave now, right? And so what am I bringing with me? I don't have a lot of skills. I know I finished school, but I still didn't have the social skills good enough. I had some, but it didn't allow me to really be who I should have been. That's what I'm saying. It's like you're always feeling that you have to protect yourself, which was with me. I always have to keep people away, and then, as I said, one of the more destructive things would be alcohol, and that's when you let the bad guys near you. And that's what happened, so you get into bad relationships. But like I always say, bad relationships, I understood those. I didn't understand the good guys. That was the problem. And when you're dealing with the bad guys, I see that most of my young life is that you just give in. You learn to succumb to whatever is around you. If it's the bullying, if it's the physical, the assaults on you, you shut your mouth and take it, because that's what I learned. But it's not healthy either. So you learn to change those ways as I got older, and I learned to understand people more. And as you're getting out into the real world, where there's lots of people who don't accept your behavior. They thought I was kind of mean or violent. Well, I grew up with that. I grew up with it. So, but I learned to change. When somebody says that to me, that kind of hits home, it's like, am I really like that? And so you have to change, it's not easy to do.
Right. And when I'm hearing about change and like learning, it's the learned behavior right from childhood. That's all you learned and that's all you knew, and growing up, and then now you're out in the world on your own to defend yourself, and you have to learn the new skills all on your own. So thinking about that, and I'm sure there's so many folks out there who are going through similar kind of impacts, maybe some less, maybe some more, or similar. There's so many impacts of unlearning and relearning and getting their life back and learning proper social skills. I'm wondering what all supports are out there for folks who are going through similar struggles, who are trying to find a path to getting better social skills and building a new life.
Well, I think that's hard for young people. I really do, because when you're living with a family, even that's violent, say that's those are your parents, but there's a lot of violence in there. It's hard because those are the people that you love too. But how do you understand that there is a different side? There is something different out there. You don't have to be this way, but yet to me, it's so important how you raise these kids. Any of your kids, if you raise them in violence, look out. And so those
Yes.
early teachings are really important, is to not be violent with them, teach them the respect that they need for others, even with their own space, somebody else's space. There's a lot of learning things and that's what you see in, say in the school system, when you're sending little guys to school now. There's so many that go at a very young age, but they learn those social skills, what's acceptable, what's not. But hopefully when they get home, it can be unlearned, only because sometimes kids are forced to be in a situation where there's a lot of violence, but it's the parents those are your parents, and those are the guys that you love. So how do you unlearn that? I don't know, other than they can learn a lot in school, and those early years are important when they make friends. But you're teaching kids to accept violence, and that's what I don't like. Violence shouldn't be a way of raising kids.
No.
You don't, because it'll just, what you teach us probably more often than not, we're going to use that too, at some point.
Yeah.
And it's not healthy for kids. So I think there's a lot of things that can change. And I do see change a lot. And we have I think there's a lot of youth programs now, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Youth programs where teens are, your body's changing, those hormonal changes, all those things that a young person has to understand, and that's a hard thing to navigate when you're a kid, especially in my time. They wouldn't have taught you very, very little of anything about body changes and, the sexual world. That was just like taboo. That stayed in the closet kind of thing, But today, kids are more open. They're getting the teachings that they should. The only thing that I see and I don't know how you can get out of that one, is the violence. And sometimes there's a lot of violence and abuse at home still. So
It's the childhood trauma, and the childhood trauma can have so many negative, serious impacts. And we were talking about adults, this is what they knew when they were growing, when they were a child, and they didn't know anything. And now they are trying to raise children, and then they probably don't know what to do.
So it helps, though, even with programs with new mothers and stuff like that, where you can get the good teachings and stuff. You don't have to stay in those spots,
Mm-hmm.
If you have to really begin to understand yourself too.
Yeah.
Look at yourself. That's not easy either. It's like, what are your faults?
Yeah.
It's that looking at you. What have you done?
Yeah.
Also, you have to acknowledge those things, or you try to make change. And that's all I can say is that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of help out there. There's a lot of counseling out there. I know that when I was in school, I don't ever remember a counselor, other than in foster care. If we had to, we could have called somebody, which we did. But in those other years, those earlier years, there was never anyone that said to us, I see you're having problems. Maybe I should, I'll get somebody, I'll counselor or somebody. That didn't exist. I don't ever, especially at the residential school, because if we'd ever had a counselor, they'd have been in deep trouble because there was an awful lot of criminal activity and they would have got reported. So that's, I think, the reason why we didn't have any help, is because of the way it was running. It was to me, a criminal organization. You're beating and raping children, starving them, making them, forced labor. So yeah, you guys would have gotten in trouble, but we didn't have the help. So that was one of the things that I see, is that you go through all this, but where was the help for us? There wasn't any.
You've talked a lot, we've talked a lot about a lot of heavy topics, obviously. And I know from our previous conversation during our season 1 series, you kind of talked about a bit about your life afterwards, and a bit about your healing journey and stuff. And I guess one thing I've noticed a lot is you laugh a lot. And maybe this is a personal question, but I guess, like, where are you now that like you're able to kind of at least laugh, like where does that come from?
Well, I think the laughter is one of those things that is inherent in all of us. And that's one of the things that's probably the more healing things, is that you have to be able to laugh. You can cry. I've cried a lot when I was a kid, but there's some point where, as you begin to see things, you have a different perspective on life. Different things are happening in your life. And I always found laughter, even when we were little kids at the mush hole, there was times where we could laugh. Just get the adults away from us. We could laugh. Kids kids laugh. I mean, they're fun. That's playtime, And so it's always in us. The laughter is given to us. What would life be without laughter? It would be pretty bleak, I would think. So that's a gift that's given to us. You have to be able to laugh. And I think that carries through. So laughter and music is big to me, even if it's just listening. I don't sing. I'm not a musical person, but music really is soothing to me. Any kind of music. I listen to all kinds of music, but it's like, okay, put this music on, and it relaxes me. And I just find so much comfort in music, So that's another part of the healing, is find something that really helps you to relax. And even if it's just talking to people, that kind of stuff, but it has to be within, I don't want the hostilities. I mean, just talking and gathering with family that I never had before, So that helps, is just family gatherings, to get to see this change of here's all the children, the grandchildren, now the great-grandchildren, life goes on. It hasn't ended with all of this. We do move on and we do enjoy life now. You can look at the past and hopefully we all learn from it. Don't do it again, Yeah.
Do you play any music?
No, I said I don't have any musical ability at all. No, never have. But like I said, it's the sound, it's the music itself, all kinds of music. It's peaceful. And the other thing that really brings me a lot of peace is nature, going out for walks. Just even if I was stressed with something, if I go for a walk, sit down somewhere, it's really peaceful. Nature is peaceful, and nature to me is healing. It's one of the best places to be. So I know those good places. I have learned them good places.
What would you like the viewers to take away from this conversation?
I think that no matter what people need to understand is that there's always somebody out there that can help you. It's maybe hard, but and I think that in general, I don't find people are, I think people are willing to listen and learn, which is a good thing. I don't hear that, I don't hear so much anymore about the, that was then, get over it, that attitude. They are beginning to understand what we as children went through. Don't look at us as adults. We went through all those things as children. And I think that's the point, is that if we could have done better as children, we would have. If we could have got out of the mess, we would have. We just couldn't escape what was there. And so I think it's just, to me, it's about education again. It goes back to educate yourself, learn about these things. And maybe there's people out there that can make a difference, make sure this doesn't happen again. You think it could be just our societies? This can happen to anybody. It can. So I think we all just have to be aware. It's that awareness, awareness of the histories and things that can go wrong, and standing up. Don't be afraid to stand up. Question things, speak your mind. There's nothing wrong with that, nothing illegal. Free speech, that's it, free speech, freedom.
Yes.
Speak your mind, yep.
Would you have any recommendations for those who might be wondering where they can go and learn about the history?
Oh, there's all kinds. The Woodland Cultural Center is one of them. They have education and all about the residential school there, the Mohawk Institute, but there's all kinds. I would say there's more information out there now today. And what we're doing, even under the Survivor Secretariat, as we move along, we're gathering a lot of information. We're getting all the history about the mush hole, about the Mohawk Institute. So at some time there will be a database, and it will be here. And right now it's kind of scattered in different pots here and different over there. So it's really hard to learn about the history. And so we'd like it in our territory. We'd like it in one spot where people can learn. And I see a lot through just talking to the young kids going to college and university. They're learning. It's out there. It's not hidden anymore the way it was. In my time, it would have been, we were only trying to educate the children, right? Make their lives better. So that's kind of like a propaganda statement to me, is that, no, that's not what happened. So I think learning the truth helps people. And you'll never, there'll always be a certain percentage that say, no, it never happened. And that's where they are. Can't change that, you know, but I think keep an open mind. It's like, if I want to learn something, I'll go digging around in the archives. I'll go looking online. I can find the history, go to a library, you know, there's tons of stuff. But the Woodland is collecting a lot because they had the Save the Evidence. So anything to do with the residential school, they actually have virtual tours. They have the survivor stories. It's going to be that kind of like that museum of conscience, right? Where you can go in there and see the layout of it and that kind of stuff. But they're closed until 2024 because they're renovating still. But the virtual stuff, you can still access that.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot. I'm just trying to think where else, but anywhere across the country, if you just Google, even on any residential school, you'll look at a map. Look under Canadian Geographic. There's a new one that just came out. It's called Canadian Geographic Unmarked Burials, Missing Children. And it's this huge map across Canada that's got all these little, identifies all the residential schools. And if you click on certain ones, it'll say active investigation going on. So you'll know what they're doing. It's pretty interesting. And I didn't, you know, it puts it in a different perspective, just the history that these are all the communities, all the residential schools that have an investigation going on, or they're looking at unmarked graves. It's pretty massive, actually, pretty massive. So it's one that you should look at. I recommend.
It's definitely like, there's definitely a lot more information out there. I don't think it's difficult, honestly, if someone even wants to start somewhere. YouTube. Just put it in the search bar. I've found several videos that are good, like even just introductions. So kind of people have no excuse not to even have learned at least something about what happened at this point.
Yeah, and you know, you can even Google. I don't find that there's much history out there, but I don't find a lot out there on the Anglican Church, and yet if they played a big role in it. They'll tell you about the history and things, how things began at the Mohawk Institute, but I think they should have more out there, but maybe they're just protecting their best interests. I don't know. But it's like, we weren't the only ones involved here. Like there's three parties. There's the residential school kids, you got your church, and then you got the government. Come on, guys. We are not the only ones with a history, you know?
Anita, do you have any other questions?
I think yeah.
I mean, we went through our list of questions plus
Yes.
some more, which we really appreciate you kind of taking the time to even veer off in a few different directions. And I mean, as before, it was wonderful speaking with you and being able to have this opportunity to basically, I guess, pick your brains. So thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much, Roberta, and you know, making this time again and sharing the wealth of knowledge and experience and information. And it's very much valuable, and we're humbled to have you. Thank you.
And very honored that you took the time. Like,
Okay, it goes both ways. I'm glad people listen. So thank you.